Much again for just doing this. I know you're very busy. I did. I've been following you for the past 20 years. Our paths crossed long time ago. I remember uh, you guys were always in the operating room, the second operating room to the left when you got out of the pre-op area at UIC. I don't know which operating room number it was. I think it was OR2 or something like that. But I always remember you because I was part of the anesthesia team, and we always talk about the surgeons, and before we get assigned to each room, what their characters are and what they like, what they don't like. Of course, now I'm on the other side, but I remember that whenever I had you on my schedule, whenever I was assigned to your room, I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. This is going to be great. And it was nothing. You don't get to know really the surgeons. You just pick up vibes and an aura, and whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, it's kind of like the primitive first impression that I'm going to pick your brain on in this podcast a lot. And so I truly appreciate you coming in for this, because it's a topic that means a lot to me, that I'm very passionate about. I've been thinking about it as a cosmetic surgeon for many years, initially subconsciously and now very consciously. As we gain experience, we tend to understand what we experience a little bit more because we have more context. It's hard to understand things without context. You just go by intuition. But once you have context, things start making sense, and you start consciously looking for them and trying to make sense of them and even improve them or influence them in a positive way that actually makes a difference, not only for the patients, but for us as clinicians. And changing someone's life is probably the most empowering thing that as a human being you can experience. Doesn't matter what environment or what topic it is. And so, I know your passion went as far as even writing a book. Now, I thought for many years about writing a book. I just could not figure out how to fit it in my schedule, because it takes a lot of time. And I really want to commend you for that, because in your book you published already many years ago, 7-8 years ago now?
2014.
2014, so it's about 6 years ago. I have it sitting on my desk here, and it's very interesting. And I think every clinician, not even plastic surgeon, just every clinician, everybody that deals with patients needs to read this book. I feel it should be a part of a curriculum in medical school to teach young students to understand more about the biology and the psychology and the neuroscience, because I feel when we understand as clinicians these aspects, we can help our patients more. And about 5 years ago, I lectured around the country, and my topic was empower yourself in order to empower your patient. And the reason why I got passionate about that is because, we do a lot of self and soul searching and self-improvement. And I was in a phase where, I was always, as a child, I was always curious. And I always wanted to understand why we do things and why we feel the way we feel, why we respond the way we respond. So that's kind of like my fascination and obsession. And same as yours with neuroscience and evolutionary biology. And so what fascinated me, the more I learned about myself, the more I understood my weaknesses and my strengths, and why I make certain decisions. And when I understood that, I felt I need to share that knowledge. I need to share that with everyone. And who better than, we see random people every day, people that we've never seen before, people that we see on a regular basis, but we can influence our community, our friends, family, patients in more ways than just cosmetic changes that some might feel it's very superficial, but you'll exploit how deep it actually goes, how deeply rooted those changes. can make actually differences in people's life. But so that became my passion. And so I look at patients more as to how I can empower them, whether it is with tools and science and techniques that I've acquired, or whether just to talking. Sometimes I just talk to them. I sit there and talk for 45 minutes, and my coordinator comes in and says, like, next patient is waiting. And I usually don't leave the room until I get the point across and until I feel I made the difference, really, because I don't want that patient to go and hop to the next guy and then eventually something bad happens to him or her. And so that's my passion. It's just something I just can't let go. And I feel the day I let it go, I should hang up my cleats and retire. But I want to share with the audience your story. And because you have a very unique story. You're a son of immigrant parents, and I'm an immigrant myself. I'm actually a double immigrant. I was a son of immigrants to Persian parents that immigrated to Germany. So I was born and raised in Germany. I grew up in Germany, but then I decided, that I want more. I saw the horizon much bigger and greater than what my parents or what my life gave me. So I came to America, and started my career here. So I know how it is when, as someone that I guess is going through certain hardships, whether it's cultural, geographic, financial, whatever that is, we are used to challenges. We're used to not getting things the easy way. And we also understand the force and the possibilities that come with empowerment. And I know your dream was, as a kid growing up, playing football. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. So tell me a little bit. I just want to, because the audiences, I have an audience that goes from teenagers, young adolescent, to professionals like ourselves, and even retired people. But the goal of this podcast is just to inspire people and teach them different, or show them a different perspective and point of view, and they can then address or apply those to their own lives. And so I want them to first to get to know you before we get into the nitty-gritty. So tell me how that went. So from football player to plastic surgeon and scientist and researcher and philosopher. It's like, this is like 180 degree to me.
Yeah, me too.
So how did that come about?
Well, I grew up, my father's Moroccan, and he grew up in the ghettos of Morocco with very little education, no formal education. I don't even know if he finished secondary school, to be honest with you. He came to the U.S. He met my mom, who was American, and they quickly got married at a very young age and had me at an early age. My mother unfortunately developed multiple sclerosis at a young age. My parents split, and we went on welfare because my mother was disabled.
How old were you when that happened?
About 9 years old.
9 years old.
So
you have good memory of that.
Oh, yeah. We moved in with my grandparents, and we lived in a small little apartment. Me and my sister shared a bedroom until I was about 12. And it was all I knew. But I will tell you, I was so lucky. I was so lucky in so many ways. And I look back now and I say, God, I wish to others they could have had some of the fortune I've had. And, I love Nietzsche, who says, to those he loves, he wishes the worst of events. I love the way he thinks, and he's my favorite philosopher of all time. In fact, I went to his house last year and spent house writing. I'll tell you that story in a little bit.
Wow.
So I grew up in a suburb of Chicago with my grandparents, and I wasn't really aggressive in school, nor did I really care much about school. I didn't do very well in school because I was more interested in football and, truthfully, chasing social activities.
Whatever that means, right?
My parents weren't so involved. They'd be like, "How you doing, son?" "I'm doing fine." And that was, it wasn't like today where parents are helicoptering and they know every single thing kids are doing. And I played football because that's what I knew, and that was I loved football. I was good at it. I wasn't, the best, but I was good enough that some colleges started looking at me. And when I went to apply for a university, I went to apply to University of Illinois because my father said, "Son, you're going to go to University of Illinois because it's the state school and it's inexpensive." Right. And I said, "Yes." if I didn't get in. And I didn't have the heart to tell him I got rejected. And I was so disappointed I got rejected from University of Illinois. I didn't know what I was going to tell him. So I had an uncle who was wealthy, and he said, well, why don't you stay home, live with your grandmother, and go to the community college? And I'm like, live with my grandmother and go to community college? I go, I don't want to do that. Then Washington University came to me and said, you want to play football? And I'm like, yeah, of course I'll play football. And I said, where are you located? They said,
At St. Louis?
Yeah, I'm like, okay. So I go to my high school counselors. I'm like, I want to play football at Washington University in St. Louis. They said, absolutely not. Your grades aren't good enough to get into the state university. You have to go to summer school. You're barely getting through school. You failed physics. You failed English. And there's just no way we're going to let, you're not ready. I said, no, I'm going there. And they said, well, then you have to go to summer school. I go, I'm not going to summer school because I'm going to have way too much fun this summer after senior year in high school. So I go to Wash U to play football. And I quickly realized that I wasn't going to be professional, even though I thought I was going to be up until then. And I just, I was a small guy. And
what happened? Did you realize it? Did the coach tell you, tell me that, because we have a lot of young listeners with all these dreams and they feel like if they don't get it, then their lives are shattered and it's over.
Right. So at the time, I thought I'd be professional. And that was my dream. But I quickly learned as I got out in the field and I was getting beaten up by these guys who were 3 times the size of me. And then I had to study. And the agreement I had with one of my uncles who helped give me some money for school, not much, just a bit, it was, you get straight A's or you're coming home. Now, I didn't have 1 A in all of high school, not 1 A. And he's like, you getting straight A's? I'm like, I never had an A in my life, but okay. That was and if I didn't get straight A's, I had to come home and live with my grandmother and take care of her. So I had incentive to do well. So I was studying at night and practice would end at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And I would study. I'm like, I couldn't do it. And so I had made a tough decision to quit football, which was heartbreaking because I was in the football fraternity. I lived in the football dorm with all my friends. So that was a tough decision, but a good decision, to be honest with you. And then I went and I started studying, and I studied and I studied and I studied. And that's all I did. And I will tell you that I didn't have a fun freshman year nor sophomore year because I spent all this time studying. Now, I wasn't a good student, so I had to learn skills, but I got really good. And I started looking at my grades. It was A. And I started getting all A's in college, and I never thought I would get those type of grades. When I graduated WashU, I went to I applied to every med school in the country, and I got into every single one except for only one. The only med school I didn't get into was Harvard, where I got waitlisted. And I had my uncle who helped put me through college said, I'll tell you what, if you get into Harvard, I'll pay for it. And I was like, okay. So I go to Harvard. At my interview at Harvard, sitting next to me is the valedictorian of my high school, Rich.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, Rich, what are you doing here? He's like, Steve, what are you doing here? I'm like, I can't believe this. I'm smart. I got really good grades. And anyways, I didn't get in. I got waitlisted. He got in. So I went to University of Illinois for med school, which was free at the time. Yeah. Despite the fact that I got into all these other great schools, University of Illinois was still a great medical school. And,
absolutely.
And I got a scholarship to go there. So I go to University of Illinois. I graduate number 1 in my class in med school. Congrats. And then I was convinced going through med school, I knew I was going to be a neurosurgeon. I'm 100% for sure going to be a neurosurgeon.
Why is that?
Because I was so motivated and so driven. And to me, to go from high school, where I was like a horrible student, to medical school, number 1 in my class, I couldn't figure out a more higher ascension. It just seemed like the epitome and the pinnacle of everything you could be was a brain surgeon. So I'm going to be a brain surgeon. I liked it. I studied it. I did research in it. I TA'd. I was a teacher assistant for neuroanatomy. So then there was a doctor in the community who I respected so much. My family is friends with him. And he had a big house. He had a pool. He had a Ferrari and a great practice and a beautiful daughter. Mm-hmm. So I had it all worked out.
There you go.
I was going to take over his practice, his house, his car, his Ferrari, and marry his daughter. That was the plan. So I
love it.
Graduating. I'm like, Dr. L, I'm graduating. Can you recommend a place for me to go to do residency? I'm doing really well in medical school, and I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. And he convinced me not to be a neurosurgeon. He's like, it's not a good field. You're not going to like it. He's like, pick a more gentlemanly field, do something else. And I always loved plastics because I was creative. I was a sculptor with clay. And it was and that was my second choice. So it was a natural move for me. And I decided I had 2 different routes, either ENT or general surgery. Back then, there was not a combined program. So you had to apply to general surgery and then go to plastics, general plastics, or full body plastics, or ENT was 1 year of facial plastics. So I chose the ENT route. and I went that route. And that was how I got to being a plastic surgeon.
So
Now that's a
interesting.
far cry from the stuff I do today with the philosophy,
Right.
but that was my initial introduction to getting into medicine.
So that brings me to the next point. And what do you feel has changed in your motivations, in your, I guess what motivated you back then is obviously in life is different. What's motivating you right now, and that's based on your experiences and as someone that not only grew professionally but also grew as a person, understanding your environment or our existence more than you used to 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Because we all go through these changes. In your particular case, how do you feel you have changed from the time where you decided you were chasing the big house, the Ferrari, the girl of your dreams, and all of those things, basically chasing a status? How have you changed from there to now, where more deeper aspects in life are important to you? Understanding basically our brains and psychology and philosophizing. I mean, what do you think the single most important thing or contribution in your life was to make these changes, and who are you today as a result?
That's a big
I,
question with a lot of facets to it.
Well, to
But
keep it simple for I guess the listeners, that one of the things that I love doing is inspiring young adolescents, because I don't know. I mean, we always say our generation is different or was different than the new generation. Every generation says that about the next generation. And it's almost like the new generation always dismisses the old generation, and the old generation always dismisses the new generation with their problems. And so there's always a disconnect. And there's a reason for that disconnect, because we change as people. But for them to understand, for the younger population to understand what happens in life, because this is a real story and your story is representative of many other stories, including my own. I mean, it's almost like our lives are like copies of each other. And if we get to it, I'll tell you a little bit about my story, but today's more about you. So to the young people chasing status, chasing money, seeing all these distractions in our society as to what's important, having a big watch, a fat car, a pretty girl, a big house, all of those things. And then at some point they realize it's not that easy. You can't chase money. You can only get to that, what I call true happiness, is if you follow your passion, if you're authentic and true to who you are. And the challenge is they don't understand what that means. They're like, what are you talking about, who I am? I mean, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And it takes for someone to live another 20 years to realize that. But how can we communicate it to make it easier for them, so they're not in their own way and destroying their own lives because their number one dream now vanished. They wanted to become an athlete, and now they think life is over. And worse even, their counselor, in my case, my counselor said literally that I was a rebel always, and my grades, like you, the only A I had was in arts, because I was passionate about arts and painting. So I majored in arts. My mom was an artist and my dad was a physician, so I was like in the middle. But that was the only A I had, and I just didn't care much about school. I didn't care about the stuff that they were teaching. So I was, and it really affects your self-confidence as an adolescent. So then if you put all your eggs in a basket, you want to become an athlete or want to become an artist, and then people tell you you're up to no good, you're not going to make it, and they crush your future essentially. How do you get out of it? So how has that affected you, and how has it changed? So I want you to explain that in that context, so maybe younger people understand.
Well, I have 3 daughters, and they're constantly trying to figure out what they want to do in life. And, we have a lot of pressure on us to either make money or have a status symbol. And while that may seem like an ideal goal, it ultimately is not. If you chase something that's not your passion, you will never be happy. So I think you have to be honest with yourself. What's your passion? What do you like doing? And you have to own it. You really have to own it. So if you love art, God bless you, you love art. I have a daughter who loves history. Go ahead and be a history major. But Dad, I'm not going to make any money. I'm like, be a history major. You will find a way to make money. Making money is not the end goal. It's the byproduct of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, I'm a plastic surgeon right now, but I spend half my time now writing, teaching. I'm as much a philosopher today as I am a doctor. And that's what I love doing. Could I make more money being a doctor? Of course. I could stay home, do more facelifts, and make a lot more money, but it's not what drives me. It's not what I'm passionate about. I like to teach. I like to connect. And I like to write. So that's what I do today. But you have to own it. And you have to realize that's who you are. When you try to be something you're not, you'll always be unhappy. And that's a hard thing for a young person to understand because there's a lot of pressure on them to follow a certain career path. And if you love what you're doing, you will be given a gift. And what that gift is living in the moment. And there's no better gift in life than to live in the moment, to be present. Not thinking about tomorrow, not thinking about yesterday, but thinking about the moment. Now, that's a very large concept for a lot of people, difficulty understanding. Even people my age, who I would like to say are more evolved in who they are as a person and more self-aware, still has a difficult time living in the moment. But if you can live in the moment, it's the best present you can have.
Mm-hmm. So true. I couldn't agree with you more. And I feel patience is really the key for young people, to be patient and let life happen. And, it's wrong to say you can control your life, but you can influence your own life by exactly what you said. And when you do that and you have faith in yourself and trust yourself that you will succeed as long as you follow your passion, all you need then is patience. I mean, I feel like the younger people, they try to get to their goal within 5 years and feel if that doesn't happen by that time, they're a failure. Much of it, actually, I think the pressure is caused by parents constantly pushing our kids. I, on my side, try to be more aware of it and not to push my kids, to let their creative mind develop and find their passion without any pressure or influence, and just trying to guide them. But it's so hard, isn't it? Because you love your children so much, you want them to succeed, you hate to see them fail, and it's so hard to stay away and to just let them do their thing and just observe them and just make sure they don't fall off the cliff or something like that. But then where do you draw the line? So I think as parents, we have a huge responsibility in facilitating that.
So I agree with you. And I think it's allowing them the latitude and putting boundaries up so they can find their creative passions. But the key here is, regardless of what that passion is, or if they decide to pursue a career in finance or business and they want to pursue financial gains, fine. But my hurdle and my challenge to all young people is to push yourself outside your comfort zone. Because regardless of what it is, whether it's art, science, math, finance, push yourself outside your comfort zone, because that's when you're going to grow. And that's where we struggle. And I believe that today, young kids, and we have a generation that is not allowed or encouraged, motivated to go outside their comfort zone, because they've grown up in a period of time with the parents who frankly have been the wealthiest parents in the history of probably the world right now. Mm-hmm. And they had the ability to give their kids a lot of opportunities. They've had the ability to coddle their kids. We've had a lot of parents who aren't working the hours a generation ago, so they're around their kids a lot more. And sometimes these kids are uncomfortable being pushed outside their comfort zone. It's okay to fall and scrape your knee and get back up. And so I think that as parents, that's our responsibility, is to let them fall and scrape their knees, let them be pushed outside their comfort zone, because it's the only way you grow. You can't grow for your kids. They have to grow for themselves. And that, I think, is our own truth too, right? I mean, when I wrote a book, I was a horrible writer. I failed English,
Same here.
Now I'm a great writer, but I push myself outside my comfort zone. So how do you do that? You find the areas that you're uncomfortable in, where you think you're not good. And this goes not just academically, but also interpersonally. Like, I was a horrible communicator. I knew I was terrible. It's probably one of the reasons I got divorced, because I was such a bad communicator. I worked on it and worked on it. Now I think I'm a great communicator. Find what you're not good at. Be honest with yourself. Make yourself better at it. Work at it. Push yourself outside your comfort zone as much as you hate it. And guess what? You get better, but you also grow significantly.
Significantly. And I think you find a strength within yourself that you weren't aware of. It's funny that, a lot of the things that we think we're bad at, but in reality, we're not bad at it. Maybe when we were a child, someone told us, you're not good at writing. Maybe it was our teacher. So we grew up believing I'm not a good writer. And I had the same problem. Um, for me, it was difficult because I had to grow up between so many different languages. And obviously I was struggling with writing. It's people don't understand how difficult it is at an early age where you're thrown between cultures and languages, that you have to keep up with the best of the best with children that grew up in their language, literally. And so from that standpoint, I always thought I have a disadvantage. So I always grew up thinking I'm bad at writing and I'm bad at communicating, just like yourself. And only until recently, like 5 or 6 years ago, I noticed that I'm not so bad at it, because the fact that I can communicate well with my patients and I can help them, that's one proof. And another thing is, I've been recently gotten into writing in the past 5 years. And, last year I was actually asked by the Washington Post to write an article. And at first I thought they're going to just ask for my opinion and someone else is going to write it. But then they asked me to actually write that. And I'm like, I'm not a writer. I mean, can I just answer your questions and you write it? They're like, no, just write about this topic. And interestingly, we're going to get to it when we switch gears, about the topic that you're fascinated about. And that's why I love having you here on my show. And so I wrote it, and basically I wrote the same way I communicate with my patients. I just wrote down my thoughts. And my wife, she has a degree in journalism, so she's a good writer. And so I said, hey, Connie, can you maybe go over this, because it's not my first language. I don't want to make a fool out of myself. And she said, well, don't worry. The newspaper, they edit it and they make sure it's all right. I said, still, but I didn't want to embarrass myself. So she read it. She's like, yeah, it looks good. I'm like, well, you didn't change anything. She's like, no, it's good. So that was the first clue. Then when I submitted it, then they said, well, we'll send you an edited version back in a couple of days. So they sent me a version back, and it was 98% exactly the same. I said, well, at first I didn't actually notice anything. So I said, did you not edit this? And they said, well, no, it looked good. We didn't have to do much. We just changed those couple of words. And so to me, that was like, and I'm thinking now, were my teachers wrong? What went wrong? Was it a self-confidence issue that I had? Did I grow? Is it a skill that I acquired and I evolved through constantly talking every day about what I'm passionate about? Did that help? Which one is it? Was it the chicken or the egg? Or did they influence each other at some point and then come to this? Whatever it is, it goes back to what you said. You follow your passion, you will somehow make it. You will somehow succeed. It will unleash these powers within you that you didn't think you have. So I think as human beings, especially today more so than ever in our society, we're so much in our heads overanalyzing things that we are our own worst enemy and greatest obstacle in our own lives, rather than the environment, or the circumstances that we constantly blame for underachieving. And so that's what's fascinating me. And it's one of my passions to kind of get that message across to these young people, because I know how powerful we are as human beings, how much potential we have. We just have to believe in it. So yeah, and so to switch gears now, let's talk about the biology, evolutionary biology, and neuropsychology of the whole plastic surgery world. I mean, I feel still that there's such a huge stigma attached to what we do as a profession, even amongst our colleagues. I live in the DC area, you live in the Chicago area. It's both, I would say, a more sophisticated corners of the country where people pay or value intellect more than internal beauty, or intellect more than external or physical beauty. And for us as people, that we see what we do differently than others judge us by, or even people judge each other for having any cosmetic enhancements done. It's kind of hard to be. We try to be politically correct, but then you want to own what you do, and you feel the responsibility to educate people about what we do and why we do it. And you spend almost all your career trying to understand what it is, what happens, and why, since humans existed, why we seek beauty, why we seek to get heads up, and be competitive and succeed from an evolutionary biological standpoint, and today even more complex from a career standpoint and getting advantages in that. So, and your research really, what's fascinating about it, it deals a lot with the subliminal and subconscious aspects of how we perceive beauty, and the difference between beauty and attractiveness, that they're not necessarily the same, that they really only make a difference when they come together, and the importance of self-awareness, self-worth, and authenticity, how all of that comes together. So you can't just take one aspect and judge it, say this is good or bad, or this doesn't work. Even in the professional world, I feel they still don't have an in-depth understanding the way you actually describe it. And your research has proven it. And it's not only your research, it's research that goes back decades, the research that we have done on just beautifications like makeups, or just how we dress and how we make our hair and how we present ourselves, how that has an effect on our self-confidence. So I want you to, from your perspective and what you've learned in the past 20 years of your research, tell the audience, what is, after all this research, how did you make sense of it? And what in your mind is the definition of beauty? And what's the difference between beauty and attractiveness? And how does that affect us?
So when I first went into plastic surgery, what I quickly realized is that we were taught wrong. We were taught to make people more physically perfect based on mathematical models that were built in the 14th and 15th century from artists that were Eurocentric. And yes, I could create a perfect nose or a perfect lip or perfect eyes based on mathematical formulas, but that didn't necessarily mean the patient was happy or satisfied. End of the day, I'm successful if my patients are happy and satisfied. So why weren't they happy or satisfied? And I recognize there's something that goes much deeper. And I quickly learned that it's not about making someone look beautiful. It's about making someone feel beautiful. And there's a big difference. They can be connected and they can be related, but there's a big difference. And that forced me to do a lot more reading. And that's when I started getting into philosophy and into art and starting to look at this very closely. And I was an evolutionary biologist in college, and I was a religion minor and philosophy minor in college. So I started looking back at where my roots were and trying to put those things together. And I started to formulate an idea, and what became hazy started to become clearer. So I went and started teaching a class at DePaul University on the science of beauty, its impact on culture and business in America. And I started teaching that, I think it's probably late to like 2008 or something like around that time. And as I was teaching this class, it was a fantastic class. It was for undergraduates. And I love teaching undergraduates because they ask a lot more difficult questions. The medical students really don't care. They just want to sleep. And I teach medical school still, but undergrad's a lot more rewarding because they come in so opinionated. I'm able to have them think differently. So I started teaching that class, and then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start making my syllabus into a book for the class. I thought I'd write a textbook. And as I'm writing it kind of evolved. And then I started doing research, and my research took me around the world. And I traveled around the world. I went from all corners of the earth, from Thailand to India to Russia to Europe, South America. And I wanted to study beauty. I went to Iceland, and I would spend time in these different communities and do my best to find the similarities, not the differences. And the more I study human behavior, the more similarities I saw and the less differences. I started recognizing the threads that make us all the same. And
when you say similarities, you're talking about behavioral, or because people look different in different parts of the world. So when you say similarities, you're talking about behavioral similarities?
Both behavioral and physical. Mm-hmm. So humans have more in common than they have differences, yet we're so quick to recognize our differences. That's the first thing we do. Oh, he or she is different than me. Different color, different background, different religion. But no, the reality is we have so much more in common than we have differences. Yeah. When you start to recognize those commonalities, it becomes very clear that we have a specific purpose and goal from an evolutionary biology perspective, and that's survival. And if you're a Darwinianist, which I tend to be kind of a Darwinianist now because I studied so much evolutionary biology, I see the purpose we have as humans. Now, that's not a religion or philosophy purpose, that's a scientific purpose. And when you recognize that survival, our goal on Earth, if you believe in Darwin, we only have one purpose, and that purpose is to procreate and to create a better species, which means you need to find the ideal mate, which is your perfect mate, not the person you're told to marry, not the person that's the right background, the right religion, the right age, the right color, the right neighborhood. That's not the person you're meant to be with. You're meant to be with someone who's a genetic match. And there are genetic matches, which is where my research is today. And when you find that ideal person, in theory, you create a better offspring, and that offspring is going to survive. That is Darwinianism. That is evolutionary biology. So we have a drive to look for that, and that drive is innate within us. It's subconscious. It's primitive. It's an archaic reptilian brain that's been there for 3.5 billion years since life has evolved. And sitting back in that part of our brain says, find the ideal mate. Make sure you survive. You don't want to get killed, so you have to protect yourself, survival, and then you need to find the ideal mate, and that's your purpose on Earth. So we're pre-wired for that. Those things are common in all humans anywhere in the world. So if I drop you off in the middle of Papua New Guinea, and I say, who's the most beautiful person in this population? At first, you wouldn't be able to tell, but after some period of time, you can start to find the same person in that population that they find is beautiful. Certain things that we all share in common. That's 50% of what we all share in common is what we see in someone else. So in other words, what I mean by that is I define that as beauty. Beauty is something that's raw, it's primary, it's subconscious. You don't think about it. You feel beauty, you don't see beauty. And you actually get euphoria. When you see something that's beautiful that feels good to you, you actually get an elevation in your mood. And whether it's art, a good glass of wine, or another person, if I have to ask you, do you think it's beautiful? And once you bring your frontal cortex into it, once you start thinking, once I ask you to be conscious of it, you no longer get the pleasure of it. Beauty works at a subconscious level. It's primitive. And what we proved last year in a study I did is it doesn't require vision. You don't see beauty. You sense.
How do you sense beauty if you can't see it? If it's something visual, how do you sense it if you can't see it?
So great question. We just did a study last year, which I just published earlier this year. We took blind people, and we had blind people rate others on a beauty scale. And then we had people who have normal vision, and we had them rate on a beauty scale. And then we took both the blind people and the non-blind people, the normal vision people, and we blindfolded them. We put masks, and we had them do the same test over again, different order. And what happened was the blind people got the same scores, whether they're blindfolded or not, and similar scores to people who have normal vision. The people with normal vision were all over the place once we masked them. So
but what were they supposed to do? How were they supposed to measure the beauty? Like see, or they couldn't see the beauty, or feel the beauty. No, was there a beautiful person in the room? Was it a picture put in front of them?
Good question. So we had a model walk into the room, sit 3 feet apart from the subject. So they sit 3 feet apart, and no talking. The person, the model who came in, had no makeup, no hair care. There was no smells, no perfumes, no jewelry, no high heels. They came in just in sweat clothes, and they sat across from the person that sat 3 feet apart, and they had to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10.
Interesting. That's fascinating.
And the blind people statistically significantly had similar results, whether blindfolded or not, whereas the non-blind people were all over the place once we masked them when they couldn't see anything. But the scores, the original scores of the blind people and the non-blind people were very similar.
What do you attribute it to?
So this is where I'm working on now. My research now is to prove that we have embodied senses. What I mean by
pheromones?
Not just pheromones. Pheromones are one of them, because I believe in pheromones. I believe it's got more of a role than pheromones.
Me too. Yeah.
Who don't recognize that are chemical messengers that are passed through the air. And in the animal kingdom, it's incredibly important when the animals in heat or when they're ready to mate, a female sends out odors. They're not necessarily odor. They could be odorless. They send out chemical messengers through the air. The male can sense it, who's ovulating, and then they Humans were thought that this wasn't so important, but there's more evidence that it is important, and that a female is much more sensitive to pheromones than a male. Females recognize it. Males were not so discerning, but females are really discerning. They can tell if someone's a good chemical match. But yet we're not taught to find ideal mates like that. We're taught to find ideal mates based on watching The Bachelor, where there's 20 guys and one woman, and or vice versa, 20 women and one guy, and they're supposed to fall in love. I mean, it's ridiculous. My kids love the show, and it is what it goes against everything I believe in.
So do millions of people.
Yeah. But we have embodied senses, and where this came about is AI, artificial intelligence. Right now, there are computers that can compute faster than our brains.
Mm-hmm.
But what computers cannot recreate, and where AI fails, is that our bodies and our brains evolved over 3.5 billion years at the same time.
True.
There are neural crest cells, and you know this as well as I do, that are derived from neurological tissue within our skin. We pick up senses in our skin, and we don't know how or why we do it, and we haven't discovered it. Just like Wi-Fi wasn't discovered 150 years ago, no over telephone or TV rays. There's going to be in the future, we're going to figure out what people call energy, but what is that ability for us to communicate subconsciously? So I believe it exists. So what I'm proving is that, yes, just like dark energy, we know it exists, we don't know what it is. There is an energy, or there is a messaging that goes between people that's subconscious.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So, it's funny that you said that, because we always talk about energy, positive, and I'm a very spiritual person. I really believe in what you believe, you exude it, and through that you influence whoever is around you. And whether you want to call it energy, whether you want to call it, and we have studies have shown that attractiveness can influence up to 3 people around us. Happiness. And and all those things. And so I think you're onto something there, and I can't wait for you to tell us more about it with your research, because this is truly a fascinating topic. I mean, I would have never thought even to investigate whether a blind person can sense beauty through energy or whatever that is that they're sensing.
Well, where I got this idea is because I read a report that showed that blind people can detect risk. They can detect a dangerous situation. And I was like, if a blind person can detect danger, how is that possible? And I believe that fear or danger or risk and beauty reside in the amygdala. Both are interpreted in the amygdala, which has been proven before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So fear and beauty are both interpreted in the amygdala, and blind people in this report could detect fear, can detect danger, can detect risk. I was like, then they must be able to detect beauty. So that's where I got the idea. And there is a mechanism of action, because the retina itself, if it's active and if it's functioning, sends a message, the retina, to the midbrain, to the most archaic portions of our brain, to the part of our brain that's been around since we evolved from reptiles. It works there. And then a secondary message gets sent to the occipital portion of the brain where vision is interpreted. But you don't necessarily need the communication between the midbrain and the occipital lobe. So you don't have to interpret what you see. Your midbrain already detects it, and then it sends a message to your autonomic nervous system, to your primitive nervous system. So that's how fear is detected. So I'm like, well, if fear can be detected, then why can't beauty? So that's where I got the premise for doing this study. And lo and behold, we showed that it's similar. So it was an early study. It was a pilot study, but I wanted to put it out there. Clearly, it needs more subjects and a larger trial.
I don't know if you're doing it, but it would be interesting to see if there's any differences between male and female. You know, how historically we know that, especially females in different stages of whether it is ovulation or maybe even pregnancy, and how that affects it. And because we know that, I guess, through hearsay or historically, that women have that sixth sense, and that's even stronger in certain times. So definitely there is something, but it would be good also to make that to distinguish that.
Absolutely. There's gender differences. Now, we had all our models be female because historical purposes shows that it's easier to detect in females than males. Now, having said that, it's a political football to start getting into the differences in genders today, but evolutionary biologists who are scientists know that there's gender differences in how we think and behave. And
I'm just curious, did you come across any research that they have done on animals? I mean, I'm a dog lover. I have 2 dogs, and I know my dog senses something that I see like 5 minutes later, and I'm thinking, how the hell did he sense that? And or how the hell we have now a family of a fox mother with 6 puppies in our backyard, and you can't see them, but my dog senses them, and they're like 50 yards out, and all of a sudden he starts growling, and I have a binocular. I started looking, and I saw them. So I mean, through the window, through the house, and so there must be something that as humans or animals that we can sense, kind of like in the lines of what you're researching. So definitely there's something to it, and I hope that you guys get to it before our generation passes, because I really want to know now. It's like fascinating. Now, to that sense, is that why maybe babies as early as 3 months old can sense beauty, or is it more with babies as a visual? What do you think?
Well, babies are looking to survive, and they recognize their mothers instantly by smell. But yeah, in theory, babies as early as 2 months of age can recognize someone that's more beautiful. Maybe what they're recognizing is the symmetry in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're also recognizing the width of the eyes, because the wider the eyes are farther apart, the more safe an individual is.
The friendlier they appear.
That's why, if you look at Disney characters, they got big wide eyes. They're
Yeah.
separate. But with like puppies, guppies, and even babies, because wide eyes are safe, friendly, and they don't create fear. If you look at a predator versus prey, you look at prey, animals that are prey have wide eyes. Predators have narrow eyes. When we see narrow eyes, we see a threat. It's another reason why we like blue eyes. We like light color eyes, because light color eyes allow you to see the pupil. Pupils dilate when we're happy, when we're friendly. So babies probably pick up on this at a young age, because ultimately they have to survive, and they're looking for something to allow them to survive.
And so that's very interesting, because that's why we're attracted to beauty, I guess, and it starts early in childhood. It's part of our survival and part of the reason why we're attracted to it. But is there, from an evolutionary biological standpoint, is there a correlation between beauty, someone that looks beautiful, and their genetic composition and health? Is there like a correlation? And is that maybe why we're seeking beauty since the ancient times?
So this is a great question. I've done a lot of research in this area as well. And this goes back to your earlier question about beauty and attraction, which I think needs to be explained and distinguished. So beauty is probably a raw, primary form of communication that says I'm healthy, well, and have good genes. And that's all it is, whether it's a human, whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal. That's how beauty works. It's the rawest, it's most primitive form of communication. That's my definition of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not anyone else's definition of it, and that's a scientific definition of it. Now, there's philosophical, there's religious definitions of it, there's spiritual, and there's social definitions of it. I'm not talking about that. That's my definition of it. It's a form of communication. Now, that's different from attraction, and it's really key that we distinguish these two, because what you and I do as physicians is we make people more attractive. We don't make them more beautiful, because beauty does not equate with what patients want. They want to be more attractive. So what is attraction? Attraction, yes, beauty is a component of it, but so is posture, so is hair color, so is style, so is the way they dress, the way they act, and most importantly, the most important contributor to what makes someone attractive, and I think everyone knows this answer intuitively, is confidence. Yeah. Not narcissism, but confidence. The person who struts across the room that we all want to be, who we all want to associate with, is the person who's confident. We love confidence, someone who owns their own skin. That is the most attractive thing. So if we as aesthetic physicians can help someone feel more confident, we succeed. Not if we make them more beautiful, but we make them feel more confident. And that's where the psychology of what we do comes into play.
So that's very interesting. You hit on a very interesting point, which is so controversial, especially with, the stigma attached to what we do as aesthetic physicians, is that, unfortunately, I don't know, I'm pretty actually sure I guess it's a societal thing where I feel still today, people tend to judge so much, and not only others, but even themselves. And I have so many patients, and I'm sure you have too, they come to you, they're like, they want to talk about anti-aging, but they're a little hesitant because they even think that they have this fear of us judging them. So the first thing they say is like, I would like to have my face a little rejuvenated, but I'm not vain. I'm not vain. It's just something that I want to do just to make myself feel better, and it's for me. So they start justifying their wish out of fear that we might judge them. What that tells me is that, number one, well, we all have fear of judgment. I mean, I think it's part of our society, it's part of who we are, and you really have to have a lot of self-awareness to be immune from from others influencing you, or other people's judgment influence your decisions. And not very many have that level of being and self-awareness, and it's something that I feel everybody should strive for in order to improve. But again, not everybody's perfect, and people have their insecurities, and with that comes fear of judgment. And how do you see what we do in this picture, and what do you have to say to people that judge not only what we do, but also people that come for our services just because they want to look better, and which leads us to also talking about which comes first. Is it the chicken or the egg? Do we look good because we feel good, or do we feel good after we look good? And to kind of get into that aspect of it.
Well, the desire to want to look good is human, and that goes across all cultures, regardless of where you live and regardless of time.
So why do we judge it?
Well,
why do people judge it? I mean, 50% of people they want to beautify themselves, but they don't like to admit it because they feel they're being judged, and they don't want to be labeled as being superficial.
So the goal is to look your best without anyone knowing you had anything done. So you don't want to look overly vain, like you've had to do something to make yourself look different. Now, having said that, that changes with styles and with time, because if you look at historically in the U.S., at one time period, women didn't color their hair. They're embarrassed to say they got their hair colored. Now today, it's not a big deal to say they got their hair colored. It's very common.
It's like, why didn't you get your hair colored?
Yeah, it's very common to do that, and no one thinks twice about it. So we have a desire to want to look better, but the goal with that desire is to make it look like we have ultimately good genes, and that it's natural, and that we didn't have something done. So that's where we are today. Now, having said that, it's a little bit different. It was different in the 1940s and 50s in the U.S., and it is different if you go to countries that are coming out of socioeconomic depressed economies. So if you look at third world countries that are starting to emerge, you will see that women and men, for that matter, will have plastic surgery procedures done, and they look at it as a status symbol because it says, I have money, I have wealth, and I can be luxurious, and I can treat myself with privilege. So they want to show off that they had a rhinoplasty or a facelift, or they may have larger breasts or larger butts than we would do here in the U.S. The U.S., and if you look at Northern Europe, where are considered more socioeconomically evolved societies, people don't want them to know they had anything done. They want to look natural, as we call it, so they look like they had nothing done. So they want to look better, but they don't want anyone to know they had anything done. And that is
why is that?
Because if you look like you had something done, you're actually judged worse. Your first impression scales go down.
What if you don't look like you had anything done, but it's the same thing. Someone knows that you had something done because either you said it or someone else told them. Is that why? Because they feel that they're not going to be judged as authentic, and they're trying to hide their genetic flaws by beautifying themselves? Is that why?
So if you can see that someone's trying to hide a genetic flaw, then they have a lower first impression. For instance, a man who's bald, who wears a comb over, scores lower in first impressions. A woman who puts too much makeup on scores lower in first impressions. A woman who tries to squeeze into an outfit that doesn't necessarily highlight herself has a lower first impression score. If you can tell someone's had a facelift, their first impression scores go down. Mm-hmm. So the goal is that no one knows you had it done. If others know you had it done, then they will rate you lower in first impression scales. And ultimately, beauty has a value in our society, and it is what it is. People who are considered more attractive, and I want to say attractive because I don't believe it's just beauty, because I mean it's attractiveness ultimately.
Absolutely.
People who are more attractive are given rewards. They they make more money, they get hired, they get hired at a higher rate. There's returns. They have more encounters with the opposite sex. So there are benefits to being more attractive. And that's not just beautiful, because there are people that are beautiful that we all know that are incredibly ugly because their personality is terrible, or they treat you terribly. And you're like, okay, that person may be beautiful, but once you get to know them, you're like, they're ugly. Now you can take someone who may not be as physically ideal, but gee, I went and saw Lady Gaga the other day in concert. This was last year. And I watched her. I was like, oh my gosh, she is so attractive. Now, if I put Lady Gaga up on a photograph and I said, measure her face in, perfect thirds and fifths, I wouldn't rate the highest, but darn, she is attractive, and that's what people recognize, is that attractiveness. So I have 3 daughters, and I try to teach them the concept of attraction is what people seek out, not necessarily beautiful. And if you can make someone more attractive, then there will be social rewards to being more attractive.
Yeah, I think, gosh, you just answered, I just had such a big aha moment. You just answered one of the biggest questions that I had about why people judge people that had cosmetic surgery done. And even though I knew, like, let's say you're trying to hide an imperfection by putting up too much makeup, and then you look like a clown, you have the clown effect, and then you judge lower. But it has the same thing with, not necessarily that it's visible that you had plastic surgery, but for someone knowing that you had plastic surgery, that's why it rates you lower. It's like they think you're trying to hide something. So I think for us clinicians, I think our biggest challenge and our greatest goal should be to achieve results that are picked up subliminally, which is what you've been advocating, which you've been done decades of research about. It's really the devil is in the detail. It's the little changes that have a great effect because of that psychological impact. It's fascinating because it's something that I wasn't taught in my training, wasn't even talked about. And it's something that I kind of picked up intuitively, but I couldn't make sense of it. And I thought, maybe I'm just overthinking it, until I came across your research, and I'm like, wow, there's actually a guy that's actually researched it and actually has proof for it. And that's fascinating. And what's fascinating is that the research you published just a couple of months ago, this article about selfies, which is something that I'm fascinated about, because I have so many patients, young patients, millennials, that come to my office for aesthetic improvements based on diagnosing their selfies. And that is just getting so much more that sometimes I have trouble even responding to all of them, just because you could pretty much copy paste my answer. So your research showed that was fascinating, because I never thought that, and I know you were surprised about the results too, that people actually judge their selfies same or even better as a picture that's taken by someone else with a camera, not at an arm's length, more standardized, where it actually reveals their true face or their true image, as opposed to a face that's been distorted through the lens taken at arm's length, where the center of the picture is about 30% larger than the periphery. So the periphery is smaller. Let's say you take a picture, a selfie, the tip of your nose appears 30% larger, the angles of your jaw, the back of your face is narrower. So, these pictures that you showed side by side, this gentleman on your article, he looks like a complete different person. And I was shocked. And so what was shocking was not how we perceive it, but how they perceive their own selfie as a better version of themselves, which surprised me. And however, an outside observer perceived their original picture as, I guess, more beautiful or aesthetic. So how is that? Isn't that crazy?
We don't know what we look like. And this is really interesting. A generation ago wasn't like this, because if I show you a picture of yourself from a camera, you're used to seeing that. Or if I show you, or you see yourself in a mirror is a reverse image of what you see in a camera. Mm-hmm. Now we have a selfie. So a patient comes in to me and says, doctor, I want my nose to look better. And they show me their selfie. And then I have my standard photographs. And then I show them, I give them a mirror, and I'm like, what don't you like? They're like, wait a second, I'm confused. And because they don't know
Same here.
what they're looking at. So when I have a moving target, how am I supposed to make the nose look best? In a selfie, in a standard photograph, or in a mirror? Where do you want to look best? And the patient's like, I don't really know. Well, my generation knows my face from a mirror, but a current generation may know themselves more from a selfie photo. And a selfie photo is a distorted view.
Yes.
And people don't recognize that their face looks distorted. The center of the face looks bigger. So if a patient will come in, they'll spend so much time showing me their photos. I'm like, it's not who you look like. And if I make you look perfect in a selfie photo in real life, your nose is pinched, you can't breathe. I go, so you have to recognize there's a distortion there. And that's why I started doing the research and writing these papers on it, because it's such a difficult communication conundrum what I'm having with patients right now about who they are and what they want to achieve and their distorted views of themselves.
Yeah, your research there was fantastic, because I thought about designing a study. I just didn't know how I could do it. So when I came across, and you just published it, what was it, in December or something like that? It came out. Yeah. I was like, oh, wow, I don't have to do that anymore. Someone else did that for me. But tell me, how does that affect their self-esteem now? Because I spend a lot of time talking to them, explaining them exactly what you just explained. And some of them still, it's that confusion that you just talked about. They look at the mirror, they look at the picture that I took, they look at their selfie, and they're confused. They're like, and then they take their selfie, they're like, no, but look here. They continue to insist. And so it's very difficult, because you don't want to minimize their problem. So at the same time, you want to help them. And it's almost like the brain overrides whatever you say. But there are, of course, those who actually have that aha moment. They go like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. How do you treat self-esteem sometimes without touching the patient? Because I'm sure you have patients that come to you, they think they have a problem based on the selfie, and they don't have a problem. They absolutely look gorgeous. They look great. You're like, anything I touch, I'm going to make that person look worse. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to have part of it. At the same time, you feel responsible communicating that properly, because if you don't communicate it properly, I mean, ethically it's kind of difficult, because what if that patient goes somewhere else, and that someone else is not aware of that and tries to do something, or thinks they're making the patient happy, and then actually making the patient more miserable, because all these insecurities, they stem from somewhere. So how do you approach your patients?
So I'm a self-esteem doctor. I'm not a plastic surgeon.
Love that. I'm going to use that from now on, because that's so true.
But it goes against what most people think. When I first started writing papers on self-esteem and confidence and attraction, all my papers got rejected from the journals. And in fact, I still have the rejection letters, because I wanted to keep them, because the reviews were, this is not what we do. We make people beautiful. We don't worry about their consciousness and their self-esteem and their confidence.
How long ago was that? Just curious. How long ago was that? Just curious about how we evolved.
Mid-2000s, I was getting constantly rejected. My lectures weren't well received. Today, now everybody wants to hear me speak, but back, it wasn't like that 10, 15 years ago, because these ideas were counterintuitive. And I was telling plastic surgeons, put your knives down, start to talk to patients more, understand what's important to them.
That's like blasphemy.
Today, that's what makes you successful. I can put up a perfect before and after picture. My colleagues can say, wow, great job, doctor. But the reality is the patient's not happy. I fail. Yeah. So who am I trying to please? My colleagues, myself, or my patients? My goal is to please my patients. So we are self-esteem doctors. So I have to understand what motivates this patient and what's going to make them happy. Because I finish my procedure, I finish my facelift, I finish my nose job when I think I've met the patient's goals and objectives, not when I think I've made the perfect nose. And that's a huge distinguishing factor. And doctors and plastic surgeons don't understand that so well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that should be our goal. That's our ultimate goal. I mean, that's the why. I mean, everyone tells you whatever you do, you have to know your why. You have to know why you're doing it. Otherwise, how can you feel fulfilled? And they did a survey of plastic surgeons, how many would or don't like what they do, and they would choose a different profession. It was something north of 60%. I think 67%. I'm sure you've come across that.
Yeah, I know that this as well.
And I think, that's why, because they don't know why they're doing it, so they don't feel fulfilled, because they don't know the why. It's just, they feel they made something look better, but then the patient is not happy, and then it really, like for me, when a patient is not happy, I dwell on it for a month. I'm like, where did I go wrong? I mean, she looks beautiful, but what did I miss? And that's how I became curious. I'm like, there is a discrepancy. There is some gap, that something I'm missing. And I couldn't find literature on it. So that's why I got curious. And one of my lines that I use on all my posts, videos at the very end, it's something that I go by. It's almost like my religion is that, I quote, if you quote, it says, my patients have, it says, my results are measured by the happiness of my patients,
Yeah.
not by the before and after. And it just one day I had that aha moment, it clicked. Yeah. And I have that because it is who I think that's our why. I mean, that's how, that should be our goal when we, from the moment we see the patient and talk to them, that should be our goal. And I agree with you. I think in a sense we have to evolve as psychologists rather than just as technicians in the operating room, or anatomist.
Hey, Daria, I gotta kind of run, so I got another call coming up.
No worries. That's actually the closure, and we covered all my questions that I had, and thanks again for taking your time. I could talk hours with you, and I hope as your research evolves, I can get you back here. Truthfully, thank you very much. And I'm going to be following your work from far away, and hopefully we get to meet each other in one of these meetings.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Steve. Take care. Have a good day. Yeah. Bye-bye.